As we unite for her. She is the embodiment of love, the symbol of tough tenderness. Here's to all the women who are wonderful, outstanding, marvelous, amazing, and never giving up. Celebrating, appreciating, and valuing her for who she is.
Good evening, everyone. I am Jamima Rafardin, and this is the last session of As We Unite for Her, the Women's Week project carried out by the Rotary Club of Kandy throughout this week, appreciating and valuing the wonder of womanhood. So it's been a week full of events and projects just to cherish her for who she is. So when we talk about women, we can't forget the girl child. As per the Health Bureau of Sri Lanka, they estimate teenage pregnancies to be a considerable number, and all these can be reduced by spreading correct awareness and properly sharing knowledges through like initiatives like this. So, keeping that in mind, today the webinar on consequences of teenage pregnancy has been planned by the Rotary Club of Kandy in lining with the project of As Unite for Her. On behalf of the Rotary Club of Kandy, I would like to warmly welcome our guest, Mrs. Dinshika Vitanage, Senior Lecturer and the Program Consultant of the Department of Psychology at the ICBD Campus Kandy. She has done her BSc in Psychology, Political Science and English in the University of Peradeniya. She has done the MSc in Social Responsibility, Social Justice at the St. Cloud State University of USA. Also, she has done the MSc in Criminal Justice, Criminology at the State Cloud University of USA. And also, I would like to welcome all our beloved participants who are present here today. So, without waiting further, let's start the sessions. Over to you, Dinshika ma'am.
Thank you, Jamima. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for having me today. And my heartfelt thank yous go to Rotary Club of Kandy for addressing a timely issue regarding teenage pregnancy under the need of having a comprehensive sexual education in Sri Lanka. So thank you for having me for this session. And
thank you for joining us.
Yeah, yes. So I think as we discussed, we may get questions from the participants while the session is happening. So I am ready to answer any questions if any participants wants to clarify anything regarding the topic we have, the consequences of teenage pregnancy in Sri Lanka. And before I go into the matter itself, I would sort of clarify why it is important for us to address this issue under sexual education in Sri Lanka. Now, considering the social and the political context of our society, some of the subjects, some of the leans that we address are sort of left behind, or we ignore them, especially the comprehensive sexual education. Because sex is, the word, the sex, is stigmatized and it is considered as a taboo in many conventional societies. And we consider Sri Lankan society to be conventional as well. So we sometimes fear to address these issues in public, in our education, and especially with the young adults or adolescents or teenagers, right? So today, we are going to address the consequences of teenage pregnancy because it is highly related to health and sexuality of young women in our society, because this is not just a issue in Sri Lanka, but this is a global issue. As you said in the beginning, we have to celebrate, we have to appreciate, we have to value our women, especially our future generation of women, on making them aware and giving them the right kind of knowledge and education, especially with regard to issues we have in teenage pregnancy about sexuality, and to how to get them on board with right kind of education. So I think this is why this is a timely matter that we all need to pay attention. So when it comes to sexual interests or sexuality, what is sexuality? Sexuality is what you experience psychologically, biologically, how you express your emotions, how you express your feelings to someone. And it is a natural thing. Even in psychology, we consider that a human being is a social being. Not only a social being, a human being is a sexual being. So there are various sociological, psychological theories that come into play to understand that sexuality is natural to people and we express them. But as we grow up, our sexual interests may change depending on our personality, depending on our social background, depending on our cultural background. So that is why certain topics, certain social matters like pregnancy, sexuality, sexual education have been pushed back because a lot of societies, in terms of their cultural values, norms, and standards, they don't want to address them in a public platform. So why is it important for us to talk about this? Because if you do not have a comprehensive, a primary, or I would say basic education about what sexuality is, then the young generation in our country may not know what to do with their emotions, what to do with their physical bodies, what to do with their decision making when it comes to selecting a partner. And this is where the problem had occurred, because we think that now, usually in certain webinars and workshops, I make this joke. It's just as a joke, not to offend anyone. I usually tell people, in Sri Lanka, babies drop from sky, because in Sri Lanka, no one has sex. No one wants to have sex. This is how the general conversation is. People pretend, or people sort of ignore, oh, I don't want to talk about sex because sex is very dirty. So I don't want my children to know about what sexuality is, what a sexual interest is, because these are dirty words, and therefore my child should not explore himself or herself into sexual content. Unfortunately, children are very curious. So even though parents may not address these issues with the children may find a way to explore what the sexual intimacy is, what a sexual activity is, and how to experiment with it. And this is why, unfortunately, most individuals at times that I have met in my lifetime here, they think pornography is a content that you can learn about sexual intimacy. It's shocking. It should not be shocking, but it should be scary. We should be scared about our young generation if they think that pornography is a content that you should learn to navigate through healthy sexual relationships. This teenage pregnancy, the issue of teenage pregnancy lines with what is a heterosexual relationship and what do we know about sexual activity and safe sex, using protection, using contraceptives, and how do we come to know of these things? How does a child or a teenager comes to know of these things? Through education, through knowledge, through information sharing, and primarily from the family. So we consider family to be the most primary social institution where a child would get socialized into the society. Even in psychology, we give utmost importance into the family relationships. So if the child does not get basic education about how his or her emotions should be controlled, the basic idea about the body image, the dignity, and what I can do with my body. How am I going to present myself? Am I going to let someone misuse me physically and emotionally? These things can be addressed through family. So the family bonding, family connection is very important when bringing a child. And at the same time, today we address about not basically about children, but about adolescents, teenagers, teens, teen pregnancy. So the United Nations define a teen as someone between age of 10 to 19, right? So that's a teen. So in some cases, there are definitions about teenagers, someone who is between ages of 14 to 19. So however, when it comes to United Nations definitions and UNICEF definitions, teenage is considered someone who should be looked after still, even though these treaties may say that even if you are a teenager, you may have the right to access to information, explore things around you, and at the same time, question things, question about the rights they have, question about your body, question about your interests. Now, in Sri Lanka, the problem here is that can our teenagers question our parents, our adults about their sexual interests or sexuality? Now, according to one of the researchers that has been, I think it was aligned with the United Nations Population Fund in 2016. I think, I can't remember the exact statistics, but for the most part, in Sri Lankan society, many girls are not aware about their first menstrual cycle or menstruation until they get it, because they have no idea about menstruation, because no one had told them, no one had informed them. So this is a problem that creates in society of having lack of knowledge about what happens to your body. Now, these things have been included in basic primary education curriculum or syllabi in other countries. But we point the finger at other countries or other societies that is very different from us, from culturally or educationally or in ethics and standards, that they are too open about with their children. So they treat their children in a way that children become stubborn, children become like adults, so they should not talk about sexuality and sexual interests. Unfortunately, that ignorance that we have in Sri Lanka have led our teenagers into exploring their sexuality by themselves and becoming victims of sexual abuse, unwanted pregnancies, and basically jeopardizing themselves with their education and with everything they want to do in their lives. And especially when you become a teen mother at a very young age, teen mothers are more prone to go through so many social issues, especially starting with stigmatization. So the society would stigmatize you because you are a teen mother. You are basically become an individual who had violated cultural values, ethical values, religious values in the society. So you are basically stigmatized, ostracized by the social system. So unfortunately, compared to mothers, the adult mothers, adult women who go through pregnancies and having a child, teen mothers have to confront so many issues that would lead them to have psychological disorders, physical deficits and disorders like anemia and many other complications. Especially in the field of psychology, I have come across research articles and studies where teen mothers would go through or they expose themselves to PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and also certain other psychological disorders like major depression, because they are not fit to psychologically and physically to go through these problems. When you go through the statistics in Sri Lanka, up to now, I think the first major organization that has been doing a lot of research on teenage pregnancy and the need of comprehensive sexual education had been United Nations Population Fund. So they have been collaborating with the Ministry of Health and Ministry of Education to get them in writing, to get them in documentation that we need to share and we need to distribute these plannings, the strategic planning to get this education into regional schools. But the problem here is everything looks really good in writing, in documentation, and unfortunately, these things are not put into practice. These education decisions are not into practice. I think a participant had asked me a question. If you can send me the question again. I'm sorry that it just like went off the screen. I think you asked about sexual education in Sri Lanka, I think, right?
Excuse me, ma'am, she has asked about how can having proper sex education help us as a society?
As a society. So having a good, very understanding or a comprehensive sexual education, right? So I would ask you, the participant, what do you expect to do in future? Do you expect to have a better family? Do you expect to have kids, right? So to have kids, to have a better family as a social being, you have to make certain decisions, right? To become a better mother, you have to understand of motherhood, to get into a marriage that you prefer, right? Not what the society prefers, but to get into a marriage, you have to have a certain plan. So to do all this, we need to have a certain understanding about what am I considering as my sexual preference. Right now, if I answer you through the theoretical aspects of psychology and sociology, throughout the history, as human beings, there is one thing that we are pretty much evolutionary targeted at, that is procreation. So procreation is common to all creatures. We are certain kind of animals. So through genetics and through natural evolution, We want to procreate. We want to have our offspring. And I don't think anyone would have a different thought unless that you sort of control your mind and body to not to procreate. So this is a subjective decision a human being can make. When it comes to procreation, we select our mate, just like any animal would do. In selecting a mate, what do you look for? Now, I have spoken with young people, adolescents, teenagers, regarding what kind of a person you are looking for in your life. So if I ask a teenager, he or she would give me a list of characteristics. This is what I look for in my partner. Right? So you especially look for love and care, and you think that I can live with this person. So when you live with someone, you sexually engaged with this person. So the sexuality or this intimacy, not just about sexual intimacy, it involves so many other criteria like respect, understanding, emotional understanding, and physically understanding, and saying no to things that you do not like in terms of sexual behavior. In most cases, our young women or our young girls and boys get into trouble, or I would say victimized, sexually abused, because they do not know to say no to things that they don't like. And this should come with education. So I think as a society, we consider ourselves to be very hospitable, very kind, and always receiving. But when it comes to subjects like sexuality and pointing out your sexual preference, there is a time that you have to say no. So this is why a lot of the times young people get abused consciously or unconsciously because they are scared to say no to the people who abuse them. And when it comes to criminal justice, much research, it would say that if a young person gets abused, it is always by someone who's related to her or her or him, or it can be a friend. So the person who will abuse you, know that you would say, wouldn't say no to them. They know that you would reluctantly say yes to what they want to do with you. So you need to always remember, you have the right to say no. This is the dignity that we need to teach our young children. And this comes with education. And we're relating this to society. So how can we make a better society? We can make a better society when our young adults, when our teenagers understand that I have some dignity about the decisions I'm making about my body, making about my emotions, making about my life. So I should not let anyone abuse me emotionally, abuse me physically, or abuse me in anything, right? I have the right to say no to that. So if the society is aware of this, then it actually automatically makes a better society with people who understand that we need to respect other persons or other people's belief systems or their preferences. Unfortunately, our society does not convey this message to our young teenage girls and boys. Most of the teenage pregnancies happen because these young girls are not aware about what sexuality includes or what sexual intimacy includes, right? And at the same time, I was talking about the causes of teenage pregnancy, especially in Sri Lanka. But a good thing about this topic, this topic is a very dark topic. This topic sometimes breaks your heart because you sometimes feel lost when you read about stories, when you study case studies about young women who have jeopardized themselves, not because they want to, but because they have been victimized under sexual abuse or making very naive decisions. Regarding the causes of what actually make a teenager get pregnant can go into several areas. So most of these areas in Sri Lanka, sometimes the young men or teenagers get raped, sexually abused. These rape, most of these cases are not reported because in Sri Lanka, there is a kind of a misconception that because we live in a patriarchic society, because patriarchy comes into play, that women should be submissive and men can handle or take the upper hand of making decisions and so on. So women or teenage girls who get sexually abused, violated, would not report these cases or would not seek help, seek professional help, psychological, medical help. And at the same time, I would point my finger at the existing education system in Sri Lanka because we have passed through that age. I was a teenager, you were a teenager, you know how talking about sex or intimacy or sexuality is such a problem in school, right? We can't even talk about other heterosexuals, right? We can't talk about, of course, as teenagers, we didn't know what homosexuality is, but now the entire umbrella term of sexuality covers the spectrum of different sexual orientation groups as well, LGBT community. When it comes to government schools, mostly government schools do not talk about the biological changes, the biological maturity in terms of reproductive health, in terms of menstruation, in terms of teenage pregnancy, right? Encouraging our students to explore and research about the danger of misusing their sexuality, making naive decisions. In most cases, teenagers have, or young girls have come into this problem or fallen into this problem because they wanted to explore their sexuality, because they didn't have anyone else to get information about contraceptives, information about the things that they look for, especially in some cases, most research would say that they would go to explore certain sexual behavior because they are deprived of either an adult was not there to listen to him or her. Now, especially when it comes to young girls, there are families, the mothers are away from them. They are probably like working in a different country. So the girls have to live with the elder brothers or the father. So in most cases, if the elder brother is a sexually active person, sometimes these girls have become victims. So that is called incest, right? So the brother may have had violated or abused the girl in the family. So these are, I think, miserable stories, at the same time sad stories, but we should not regard them as stories or scenarios that we cannot prevent, that we cannot avoid. We can avoid these things happening. We can put a stop to teenage pregnancy in our society. Compared to United States of America, compared to Great Britain, we are at a very low rate of teenage pregnancy. But we need to maintain that rate. I'm not saying that by maintaining that, okay, it's okay to have teenage pregnancy. If we can make it zero, that would be wonderful. But how can we make it zero? With the education. So that comprehensive sexual education should start at school or in the school, in class. So there has to be have to be trained teachers who can take up talking about sexual intimacy openly to school students. One problem some of these organizations like United Nations Population Fund find is these teachers are reluctant to address these issues to students. They are pretty embarrassed. They feel sort of shame to talk about the human body or sexuality openly to children. I think that is a cultural barrier we have, but we have come to 21st century. So if we are to continue this scenario, if we are to continue the way things been happening, we will always have teenage pregnancy as a social psychological issue in the country. So that to avoid that, we need to come into strategic planning. So when we address the issue of the consequences of teenage pregnancy, we need to make sure that if a girl gets pregnant, still that girl is part of the community, part of the society. No girl would ask intentionally to be pregnant. In many cases, because of lack of knowledge, because of lack of education, these young girls get victimized by being teen moms, teen mothers. So we need to have a system designed to approach these young girls and get them to finish their education, finish what they have been doing, and also promoting overall well-being, psychological and physical well-being, to feel or to get them to feel that they are dignified in society. Unfortunately, these young girls get a certain psychological, a negative, a feeling that once they get pregnant and once they have a kid, my life is over. And this idea, the psychologists or researchers have found out, the same idea comes to adult women as well. When you have a child, some women feel like my life is over, my life is finished. I don't have to do anything else because my time is finished. I don't have energy. So this negativity is sort of attached to this motherhood and womanhood, especially with regard to our teenage daughters or young mothers. We need a system to get them back to, get them on their feet in the system, to help them to finish their degrees, help them to finish their high school education, and have them find employment opportunities. And at the same time, some of the other consequences of teenage pregnancy would be these mothers lack nutrition. Malnutrition has become a problem in Sri Lanka. One of the reasons is that once the family comes to know that the young girl is having a kid, sometimes they kick her out because the family thinks, okay, you have brought us shame, so we can't have you anymore in our household, so probably you have to go and find a different place to live. Sometimes these teenage girls may not have the partner with them. So usually in cases like this, a teen girl may have sexual intercourse or sexual experience with another teenage boy. In some cases, if she becomes victimized by an adult, definitely the child does not have a father. And this is why in Sri Lanka, abortion has become a problem. Now, abortion is illegal in Sri Lanka. But do you know that in 2016, there were more than 650 abortions have been taking place in Sri Lanka? And personally, I know because I have been doing some of my research when I was in the Peradeniya University, and I have come to know people who have been searching and asking, and these are adult women in their ages of 30 to 35 to go for abortions, right? Because our system does not support them. So if we have a way to protect these young mothers, they may not have to get an abortion. If we have a way to get the partner to support these young mothers, we may not have to have them get or go for illegal abortions. And do you know that these illegal abortions have jeopardized these young women's lives physically and psychologically, and they have to go through so many psychological and physical consequences for the rest of their lives, because these abortions are actually executed by inexperienced doctors, sometimes not well experienced doctors in dodgy places. So we have to fear about their hygiene and their protection. But unfortunately, we did not have any strategic system to address this. So these are the consequences of being a teenage mother in a society like ours. I am not saying that we need to accept the fact that teenagers, right? What if they have? Then are we going to reject them from the society? No, we can't, because these young women are part of our future. These young women are part of the idea of womanhood in our society. So we need to plan things out to help them out. But at the same time, we need to address the root causes of not getting these children pregnant. So that is done by the education system in the society. So this is why I think from 2013 onwards, the United Nations Population Fund wanted to work with the Education Ministry and the Ministry of Health in Sri Lanka to create a strategic plan on having a comprehensive education, sexual education plan inside the curriculum in schools, and especially all schools in Sri Lanka, to get the children exposed to talk about their sexuality, sexual experience, and to talk about safe sex behavior. And these are not topics that you should be embarrassed with, because at one point of your life, you will reach that stage where you would plan to have a life, right? When you become into a young adult, your body would naturally create a certain I wouldn't say an urge, but I would say it comes with the evolution that you have the idea to procreate and start a family. So if you have a better knowledge about how to do it, you can protect yourself. Not only protect yourself, you can protect someone else from falling into trouble, right? And I think I got two other questions from two participants. If you can read that out, that would be really great.
Yeah, there's a question asked from a participant. She's asking, like, if a baby sister or a baby brother asks from their parents as how they are born, generally the people will say babies were given by God or they fell from the heaven. So how can you actually explain the process to that kid?
Yeah, very good question. And I think many people have asked me that question, is it okay for me to tell how a baby is born? What I have been telling is, yes, you need to tell your kids how a baby is born, but using the appropriate images and appropriate language. Now, the kids don't understand the language we use. If you talk about the reproductive system, if you talk about using the words like sexual intimacy, the kids won't understand. But we can use sensitive, culturally appropriate and culturally appropriate images in order to give them an idea. Babies do not drop from the sky. Babies do not come with a bird, because in Sri Lanka, most parents, I have heard, when their siblings ask about their sister or brother, the parents would jump in and say, oh, a bird brought your sister, your brother. That is so misleading. I get so mad at times. Why do you have to lie to the child? Because the child is anyway going to find out birds don't bring babies, right? So why not you tell the truth? But you can tell that truth in a way that the child may understand. Now, I don't remember this country in my head, but I watched a documentary, I think it's in England. They have a system where parents have access to these books, these coloring books that I think those coloring books are with little flowers, vegetables, and little tiny objects that children can understand. There's a way that you can use these images to sort of appropriately tell these little children how a baby would born, right? Little cartoons, I would say. And I do not know whether I have this. I think I fell in love with that book after I saw that book, and I read it because it was very interesting, because these cartoon characters sort of talk to the mind of the children about the reproductive system and how a baby is born. So I think as a Sri Lankan society, we can use sensitive, culturally appropriate language and images in order to address our children about how sexual intimacy works and how children are born. And there's another question, I think. Is that the only question? I thought we got 2 questions.
Yeah, somebody has asked how our culture and society affects most of the teen pregnancy in Sri Lanka.
Sorry, can you repeat it again, please? I think I did not hear.
Yeah. Does our culture and society the reason for most of the teen pregnancy in Sri Lanka?
Well, I would say I wouldn't blame the entire culture. I wouldn't blame the entire society, but I would blame a certain elements of the society. Now, our adults have a very thorough responsibility in educating children about I would say, now when you teach young kids about when someone approaches you, a stranger, right? Now, this is practiced in many Western societies, that the parents would say, do not talk to strangers, do not let a stranger come and touch you, because it's a bad touch. It's a bad behavior. So the children are taught in a way, when someone comes and approach you and they want to touch you, you sort of step back. Now, in Sri Lankan culture, I have seen parents would let anyone pet your kid, anyone give a candy to the kid, right? So the kids get friendlier with these people, and these are basically strangers. So I think we can navigate through these practices in order to safeguard our children. And this is also to do with teens. So if we can have certain barriers, certain, I would say, not as barriers per se, but certain boundaries about how we communicate with other people, we can set up a certain establishment about how to protect our children, not just by ourselves, but the children themselves know, I should not talk to strangers, I should not walk with this stranger. It is bad. It is bad that I am away from my mother, I am away from my father, so I need to run away and tell my parents that man has been talking to me, this woman has been talking to me. So in a certain way, the society has a certain responsibility in protecting our children, responsibility by reporting these incidents to certain authorities so that the people are aware. I think in most cases, now, for example, teen pregnancies are not reported. Why? Because it is a stigma on the child, stigma on the family. So most of the times, the families would try to cover it up, right? Or encourage the child to go for an abortion. But these things do not stop from there. You do not think about the physical and psychological consequences the teenage girl would go through. So I would say, in a way, society has a responsibility. Society is accountable for stopping these things happening. At the same time, the education system and the parents and the adults have the most primary responsibility of taking care of the of the children, especially teenagers. And teenhood is psychologically and physically a very difficult phase. And I think most of us have gone through that. We love to explore, we love to experiment with things, and we become curious. When you study developmental psychology, it's a branch of psychology, we talk about the development of human mind and the body from birth to death. So psychologists like Jean Piaget, psychologists like Erik Erikson, and Sigmund Freud, especially with the psychosexual stages that Sigmund Freud would say, a person would go through certain sexual stages, must go through a certain sexual stages in order to become a fully accomplished adult. But if you do not go through these stages, you may not have that comprehensive education to understand the good and bad experiences the individual face in life. So therefore, I would highly say that not only the society, but your parents, your adults, the relatives, all the siblings, and your education system has much responsibility in giving the information. The United Nation, I think it's UNICEF, the UNICEF clearly says that, and also United Nation Population Fund would point out that young children, young adults, adolescents, or teenagers have the right to access information about sexuality, information about healthy sexual relationships, information about sexually transmitted diseases. Now, unfortunately, not only adolescents, even adults in our society do not know about sexually transmitted diseases. And that happens when you have lack of knowledge about safe sexual practices. So when I address STDs, when I address about sexually transmitted diseases or infections in certain webinars and workshops, people try to hide themselves. People think, oh my God, it is so shameful to talk about sexually transmitted diseases. But unfortunately, there are number of people go through sexually transmitted diseases, and it's a sort of a secretive thing in our society that you want to go and get help, medical help, counseling, or medication from a medical professional, right? So if we do not address these issues, how are our teenage daughters, our sons, our children going to know about these things? So this information has to be public. This is not to just entertain yourself, but to understand the danger of not having a proper, comprehensive, established education. At least we have to encourage our young people to read through the statistics about teenage pregnancy in Sri Lanka, statistics about sexually transmitted diseases in Sri Lanka, statistics about sexual abuse violation in Sri Lanka. Because once you read the danger of it, you're not going to put yourself into that level. You're not going to invite that trouble, right? So I think this problem is to do with lack of knowledge. So even in other countries, most of the times, people with lack of knowledge, especially the parents, when parents are not knowledgeable, the children of those parents have been victimized of sexual abuse, or their teenage daughters being pregnant. Because why? The parents have had not the conversation with these young girls about their sexuality. And that is very unfortunate. And I think our society should not go there, because we consider our society as an educated society. When it comes to literacy, we are still on the top of the list in South Asia. So why not use that knowledge to encourage our children to get the right kind of education and the authentic education, right? Are there any other questions?
Yes, there's one. Somebody asked me like, what's the best age to have a discussion with a teenager about sex and relationships, especially when their parents are not having or not into open discussions.
So the best age would be, I would say 14. That is the borderline that you become a teenager, 14 to 19. So when you hit the age of 14, that's where for most children, the hormones start to change physiologically, right? So you sort of get excited about exploring and you have curiosity about many subjects and same time about sexual preferences. So I think 14 would be the best age to explore yourself into sexual education. So if you do not have access to information, please do not rely on what your friends would say, what your friends would suggest, especially on pornography. Now, in 2016, I think we are still in the list. In 2016, I can remember Sri Lanka was in the list searching on Google, searching for word sex. So we actually have categorized our country. I'm not saying sexually frustrated, but people have been looking for pornography. So that is very unfortunate. Why? We have found ways to secretly navigate into watching pornography because either we have lack of knowledge about what intimacy is, because a lot of people think intimacy is just uh, getting intimate with the body. But intimacy is more than that. You have to have emotional establishment. You have to have a certain trust about yourself and the other partner, and also establishing your dignity. And for many cases, people would just go into unhealthy sexual relationships or become abused because that dignity part is not there. So first you need to create dignity. I would suggest, if there are teenagers listening to this conversation, I would suggest before you go and explore what sexuality, sexual intimacy is, or sexual practices, I would say. In psychology, we call them healthy sexual behaviors. You need to educate yourself on what is self-respect, what is self-esteem, how can I improve myself to embrace myself as who I am, right? So about my body image, how am I going to understand about my body parts, right? Once you have that knowledge, once you have that awareness, you can explore yourself into understanding what sexual intimacy or sexuality is. But do not rely on pornography or peer pressure, what peers would say. If you actually want to have that conversation, I would suggest you boldly ask your teacher or your parents about, I have a question, I need to clarify it. Can you answer? Sometimes adults would say, yes, adults would agree to answer your questions, but you need to try. Unfortunately, we were taught, or we are still teaching our young to not to question adults. Now, that is one barrier we have, because adults would say, oh, don't ask me those questions. You are not at an age to question these things. What I'm saying is correct. So sometimes teenagers get very frustrated because they are not being heard or they are not being answered. So if you are a parent who can understand the changes that happens to teenagers, the kids in the family, you'll definitely agree to have a certain open-minded conversation with the child, right? I'm not saying that we are trying to get our families to be westernized. This is not a problem about Eastern and Western. This is a problem about our children. This is a global problem. So the only way to address this is to have an open conversation. And as an adult, you should be willing to share right kind of information. If you do not have right kind of information, you have to address a social worker or someone who's trained in sexual education in the Ministry of Education or healthcare system. there are professionals who are willing to talk to children about their sexual preferences. And do not consider this as shameful. This is not shameful. This is the right kind of education. This is the right kind of path you are taking for your kid. Right? I think there was another question that popped up.
Yeah, somebody has asked like what are the after effects or what happens after you find a teenager is pregnant, especially the family and the friends will be like very odd towards us. So what do you think will happen after a girl becomes pregnant?
The child, not to make her feel that she's useless, that she's stupid, that she made a bad decision. You cannot reverse the fact that what happened to her. What we need to do is, like I mentioned in the beginning, that we need to make sure that her life is not jeopardized by the decision that she made. So the decision has already been made, and now she go through the consequences. So the best way we can address is, if she is educating herself, if she was in high school or in college, right, we help her, we support her, we create a social support system to make her finish her education. Most of the research studies have pointed out that teenage mothers who got through education were able to find employment. Because in societies like ours, we criticize the girl, we call her names, we do things to tell her that you do not belong in our society anymore. So sometimes these girls have suicidal ideation, suicidal thoughts, and some have committed suicide, right? We can't let these girls take bad decisions like that. So we need to create a support system. The family needs to create a support system. The friends have to be understandable in getting her to finish her education so that she can find employment, right? So that doesn't mean that we encourage teenage pregnancy. What I suggest here is, once it happens, you cannot reverse it. It has happened. Rather than sending the child to get an abortion illegally and jeopardizing her psychological and physical well-being, this is the best way we can get the teenage mother to look after herself. So we need a strategic plan, a system. I think our healthcare system has to pay attention to this. I feel like because sexuality and pregnancy, teenage pregnancy, is somewhat not given prominence in a country like ours, therefore we do not have a strategic planning system. What can we do with our teenage mothers? So if we do not have a plan right now, we can create one. This is why we get a lot of funding, we get a lot of push from organizations like United Nations Population Fund and UNICEF under UNO, United Nations, in order to take care of our young mothers, our teenagers and children, to get them on board with finishing their education and accomplishing their dreams. So that is the best way that we can go about this. I think there was another question. Okay. Is there another question? I saw someone had asked a question. So if not, I think we came to a good understanding about the causes of teenage pregnancy in Sri Lanka and the consequences. So many of the consequences can be tackled positively if we have a comprehensive sexual education. Now, some of these problems cannot be undone, cannot be addressed in a single day. This is not going to stop within 1 week or 2 weeks. This is going to stop gradually. So what we need to do is, we need to have a certain strategic plan in our education system to incorporate sexual education into syllabi so that our children can learn gradually. And this content that we make about sexuality or sexual education has to be culturally appropriate, has to be very, in a way, sensitive, because in Sri Lanka is a multi-ethnic, multilingual, multi-religious country, so that we need to respect the individuals, different individuals in society, in schools. So it has to be culturally appropriate. The language that we use to address the issue culturally appropriate and very simple. So if we can give this plan to our children, we have hope. We are now have the low rate teenage pregnancy compared to other societies. I think if we have a definite plan about openly discussing it in the academia, in the administration, and at homes, we are definitely going to have a better future for our teenage girls and boys. And like you mentioned in the beginning, we have many things to celebrate, appreciate, and value about womanhood in Sri Lankan society.
There's another question.
Yeah.
What if we go with ancient era practices that are not having paper written marriages but loyal bonds by heart? I think it will reduce rapes and teen pregnancy.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah. What if we go with ancient era practices that are like not having paper written marriages but loyal bonding by heart? She thinks it will reduce rapes and teen pregnancy. So
I think your line was a bit. I did not get the exact question, but if the participant wants to send me that question, I would definitely answer by writing the answer to you, because I think your line was a bit off. So I honestly did not hear the entire question.
So, shall I repeat it?
Yes, now I think I can hear you.
Okay. So what if we go with ancient practices, like not having paper written marriages, but loyal bonding by heart?
Yes. So that's a very interesting question. So who brought the legalized marriage to Sri Lanka? Colonization, right? So the Brits brought the legalized marriage. And there was a reason why they brought the legalized marriage into Sri Lanka, because when there was no legal system to get people married, people have been either sleeping or having sexual behavior intimacy with a lot of other people they prefer, because there was no legal bonding. You have certain individual. I think in our society sort of brought us the idea of monogamy, right? I'm sure most of you are aware about polygamous marriages and monogamous marriages. I think the Sri Lankan society is more directed towards monogamous marriages, monogamy, living with one partner for a long time. So this legal marriage system sort of restricted our sexual behavior. But back then, we did not have that before we got colonized, so that people have lot of preferences to be with who they want to be, and had offspring. And this offspring, we know who their actual father was, who their mother, because the different other connections. So in a way, I think legalizing the bonding, legalizing this intimacy to us, I wouldn't say to a paper, but to a law, had in a way controlled our sexual preferences. As creatures, as animals, I think it is good to have a certain kind of control. Why? Because we know that we can protect ourselves. So we can protect ourselves psychologically and biologically by doing so. So we have conditioned ourselves, right? So this is a kind of a sociological aspect. So that made us, or made our society, in terms of selecting our partners, that we live with a partner for a long period of time. But that doesn't mean that we can go through divorce, we can go through separation. Some people get a divorce because they may not be able to stay with each other. Some people do not get a legal divorce, but they would separate themselves from each other. So people make decisions. But if you ask my academic statement or idea about this, is having legalized bondings make societies kind of structured, kind of strong, rather than we are relying on with loyalty or emotional bonding, because people change. So in a way, we have driven ourselves to monogamous marriages, right? There are people who still prefer polygamy, but for the most part, we live in a certain a nuclear sector or a nuclear setting, a nuclear family, sexually having intimacy with one partner. I think that's good in terms of sexually transmitted diseases, right? So having one partner in a medical term, in medical concerns, is better because many of the times the medical concerns are about when you have number of partners, you may be susceptible, you may expose yourself to sexually transmitted diseases. That answered your question. So if you guys have any more questions, I would love to answer them off the session. I think for today's session, I would be done with it. I hope that everyone had I wouldn't say a good time. This is not a sunny topic to talk about, but what I've shared with you, that you have time to ponder, you have time to evaluate it, and to think that what kind of decisions we need to take in preventing teenage pregnancy in Sri Lanka, and making our young teenagers understand about their sexuality and getting a comprehensive sexual education.
So it seems that no questions on the chat. Also, if there are questions, you can contact Shika. And on behalf of the Rotary Club of Kandy, I would like to thank our beloved guest, Ms. Shika Singhatna, who dedicated a valuable time and shared her knowledge with us. We really got to know a lot of things regarding pregnancy, sexual education, how important it is, and the more about raising awareness and educating the young child. So, ma'am, thank you so much for joining us today. And also, I would like to thank the participants who stayed throughout the session. And we have a token of appreciation for you,
ma'am. Thank you so much. Thank you, Kandy Rotary Club, for having me. Thank you so much for the work you guys are doing. Continue to do that, and creating these awareness sessions are very important in our society, so that we can break barriers and lead ourselves to empowerment of youth, empowerment of women, and celebrating, evaluating, valuing ourselves, and embracing ourselves for who we are. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Have a good night.
Good night.